Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. The only podcast where it's okay to talk in band. On this podcast, you will be able to hear conversations with some of the greatest names in wind band conducting, composing, and arranging. We'll also visit with great college, high school, middle school, and elementary band directors to get their thoughts on various aspects of being a band director. We'll have regular check-ins with instrument specialists, music dealers, and instrument repair professionals. And if that's not enough, we'll even have regular conversations with Dr. Tim, who will help keep us motivated. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. And now, here's Charlie.
Welcome to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends, and this, our 19th podcast in the series. We're sure having a lot of fun with this series, and I hope you're enjoying listening as well. We got two great conversations for you today. And you know, everything's changing, everything's going upside down, and it's going to be really fun and refreshing to just hear from a couple of band directors, a couple of guys who have been there and who have done that and just had some incredible programs and incredible successes along the way. We're going to begin with Stan Schoonover. Stan was at Mount Vernon High School in Virginia, went to Robinson High School in Virginia in the Fairfax County area, became supervisor of music in Fairfax County, and he's going to share some wonderful insights that he has about what we're looking at with this fall and the coronavirus and opening schools. Our second interview today is going to be with Bob Buckner. Bob was a great school band director in Sylva Webster, North Carolina, and he's got a great story to tell. He even taught in a school bus. You're going to hear all about it. And then he had incredible success in the marching band world. But I got to tell you, I've known Bob a long time, and he's just one fine band director. It's a great conversation. I hope you're going to enjoy it. We welcome you to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. We'll be right back with Stan Schoonover.
Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, Eastman Musical Instruments, and Vandercook College of Music.
Well, it seems like 100 years ago when I was judging a band competition in Florida. I had been on a panel of judges, and we had flown all night from El Paso, Texas to Fort Lauderdale. We were doing a band competition down there, and it was going okay. And then all of a sudden, this incredible band comes on the field from Mount Vernon, Virginia, Mount Vernon High School in Fairfax County, Virginia, and they were unbelievable. And our next guest is the guy that directed that band way back then. And since that time, we've become just great friends, and we've hung out together on too many occasions, and we've played a lot of golf, and we've judged a lot of band festivals. And it's just an honor to have my buddy Stan Schoonover on the podcast. Stan, welcome.
Thanks, Charlie. How are you?
Man, I'm doing good. So Stan, let's get off the most important question right off the bat, because I'm sure our listeners want to know. How's your golf game?
Well, I hate to say it, but, you know, it's in the tank. Although it's been great because it's been one of the only things we can do during, March, April, May, and June. So it's been a blessing to be able to go outside and play.
So we'll keep the interview short because I know you're probably heading to the driving range this morning, and then you got a big tee time. So, yeah. Okay. Well, Stan, for the folks that don't know you or haven't heard about you, and I don't know, they must have been under a rock for the last 50 years, but give us a quick rundown on your career and where you grew up, went to college, and your jobs that you've had.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Poconos in northeastern Pennsylvania. Went to East Stroudsburg High School, had three great role models at that point, Clem Wiedenmeyer, my elementary band director, John Casagrande, my high school band director, and then Bob Zellner, who is my director at Gettysburg College. So I did my bachelor's at Gettysburg College, and during the next 3 or 4 years while I was teaching, I finished my master's at Westchester.
Wow. So then your teaching career, you started where, at Mount Vernon?
Teaching career, I did as a lot of folks do. I started for a year as an elementary band director in Gettysburg. That was a leave of absence job I was filling. And then I got hired in a little school system close to home, Bangor, Pennsylvania. And I taught in Bangor for 4 years. And then I moved to Mount Vernon in Fairfax County. I taught at Mount Vernon for 10 years and West Springfield and Robinson for 6. And then I went into the office as the music supervisor for Fairfax County.
Well, you had great bands at Mount Vernon and Robinson. And then you followed the legendary Mo Turrentine as music chairman for the Fairfax County Schools. So what was the scope of your work when you were chairman, and how many schools and how many staff members were you responsible for?
Fairfax County is a pretty big place. So there were 147 schools at the time. And we had, in the music staff, we had over 500, close to 600 music teachers in the system. And my job was to oversee the entire program. I had help in the office with some of the other disciplines. I was primarily responsible for taking care of the instrumental music program, but music overall, and making sure that the biggest part of my job from just a work standpoint was each spring and summer I had to schedule elementary band and string teachers in 147 buildings. So that was quite a task. It took quite a while, but that and overall budget for the system, buying equipment, and interviewing prospective employees.
So what was the most difficult part of that job?
I think the most difficult, if you want to call it that, which and sort of frustrating part, was to just make sure that everybody was always aware of what a great music program we had, and doing everything I could and everything we could in the office to increase and protect that program.
Yeah, the Fairfax County district is legendary. I mean, those are some of the greatest bands in the nation that are there. And they're still really terrific bands in that part of the country and for the whole country as a whole. So when you think of the staff that you worked with over the years, Stan, what are some of the characteristics that stood out that made those teachers really great?
Well, it's odd because, there are a lot of different successful teaching personalities. I had the John Casagrandis and the Jeff Bianchis and the Carl Blyes, and they're all very different. But I think that first and foremost, it's a passion for music and for teaching music that is the most important thing, the most important characteristic for anyone to have. I mean, certainly work ethic is important, but basically having a passion about music and then a passion for teaching kids.
And what was the most frustrating part about dealing with some of those teachers?
When I had to call their administration and defend them for a few things that they might have gone a little over the line about. a little too passionate sometimes.
Well, we've all been there too, haven't we?
Yeah.
So since you retired from your supervisory position in Fairfax, and I'm not sure how many years that's been, was it 6 or 7 right now?
11 now.
11?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Man, you're a lot older than you look then, I'll tell you. 11 years. So you've been really busy still as a clinician and an adjudicator. Any thoughts on how teaching band or being a band director has changed from the days when you first started?
William D. Ravelli used to say, bands are still bands and good teaching is still good teaching. Having said that, the situation is different today. I mean, my last year actively in the classroom, I hate to say, was 1998. So it's been a long time since I've been in the day-to-day job of teaching music. And student attitudes and adult attitudes are different than they were back in the late 1990s. I think it's a little more demanding today in terms of how you have to prepare and present your program and justify your decisions. I mean, there's a lot more scrutiny that goes on in the world of education now than there was 20-some years ago.
So I know you conduct the Fairfax County Winds, which is a community band in the D.C. area. What's the history of that group?
So when I went into the office to become the music supervisor, it immediately became apparent to me that I no longer had anything to do artistically. I was now an administrator. And so about halfway through my first year, I pitched an idea to my boss saying, I want to start a teacher's band so that we can meet and talk about issues and talk about teaching and talk about music and talk about how to rehearse. And so I started that band in December of 1999. It took a year to get things sort of off the ground. And actually, Mo Turrentine, who you mentioned earlier on, was really helpful in helping to convince my boss that this was a good idea. So we started the band, and it became a class in the Fairfax County Public Schools Academy. Teachers could sign up free of charge to take this class and get recertification points and non-college credit if they wanted it for playing in the ensemble. So it was great for me, and I think it was great for teachers. So we just hit year 21 with that group, and we're now private. It's a 501c3 group now. I'm not teaching classes anymore, but that's how it began, and we've had a great run. We've had a lot of fun.
And you were selected to perform at the 2020 Midwest Clinic. Congratulations. And that has now been canceled. So
congratulations.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts prior to the time you learned the clinic was canceled? I mean, you know, the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, Chicago's having some issues all on its own. What was going through your mind before you got word that it wasn't going to happen this year?
Well, so the last time I met the band was on March 1st, which is when we made our recording and submitted it. And literally 2 weeks later, I'm in Indianapolis for the Music for All National Festival, which I coordinate. And, you know, we get one night in, and the next day, the whole world just stopped. So, I mean, but within 2 weeks from the time we made that recording with my community band from Midwest, and 14 days later, you know, all bets off. I mean, it's you know, just a really scary time, and it's still pretty scary, Charlie, as you know. I mean, here in Northern Virginia, we're not necessarily a hotspot anymore, but we're pretty far behind some of the other parts in the country and how open we are for things. So I was really sort of on pins and needles. You know, having taken the Vandercook band so many times to Midwest, how hard it is to pick music and how hard it is to get a program put together with all the restrictions and requirements that the clinic has for that. So there are hours and hours and hours of planning that had already gone in with no clue whether the event was going to happen or not. And in reality, I think it's exactly the right call. There's just no way you can get 10,000 people together and possibly be safe. So I think everybody made the right decision.
So, you know, we heard of groups like, New York Philharmonic has canceled all of their things through the rest of 2020 and things like that. Any idea when your community band can get back together and start rehearsing? And any thoughts about how you do that in this age of social distancing?
Well, I'm looking for a parking lot, and everybody brings their lawn chair, their music stand. We sit outside and, sit 6 feet apart and have at it.
And a boatload of clothespins, right?
Right. Oh, we laugh, we joke, but I don't know when we're going to be able to get back inside someplace to rehearse. I mean, it's just our schools right now are struggling with our public schools in Fairfax County have floated a two-pronged proposal. They're proposing either no on-site education in the fall or kind of a every other day schedule so that every student would go to school 2 days a week and be at home 3 days a week. And with that, and no, George Mason University, the Center for the Arts has canceled all their performances through December 2020. The Kennedy Center is closed through December 2020. So it's a challenge right now to find any way to, rehearse and play.
Yeah. Those every other day things, the 2 days on and 2 days at school and the rest distance. I'm sure that's there to limit class sizes and to limit the number of students that are in classrooms, correct?
Exactly right. And primarily, as we all know about public school systems, when you reach a certain size, it's all about lunch and transportation. getting everybody to the school and getting them home. And the restrictions on buses are the 50 some 70 passenger buses are only going to be able to transport about 20 kids. So getting kids to school, you can't get everybody there every day safely. So, and then just getting them in the building, taking their temperature every day before they come in. I mean, there's just a myriad of things, and cleaning the buildings every day and every night. It's just a whole new world of what normal is going to be.
So you got your administrator hat on right now, and I love it. So let's continue down this path a little bit. In your previous role, and the decision to cancel the Midwest Clinic, but we got a lot of directors out there that are facing the fall and marching band and starting beginners and all that sort of stuff. What questions should those directors be asking themselves as they start looking for the new year?
First and foremost, for everybody concerned, the faculty, the staff, the students, how can we be safe? I mean, how can we provide the best environment for being able to have some kind of face-to-face education and still be safe? And there are tons of studies being done right now about playing instruments that seem to lead us to think that playing an instrument might actually be better in terms of how close together you can sit, because the instrument seems to mitigate most of the aerosol spray out, but you still got all the water keys that you got to deal with on brass instruments and where that all goes. But you got to be safe. And then we've always been, I think, in our profession, a pretty creative bunch. So finding outlets, you're not going to meet all 50 or 60 of your students in an ensemble ever. Unless, again, you can go outside and just stand there and play. So you're going to have to find ways. Years ago, you had a great chamber music program in your high school. And I think that's going to be the way things are going to have to start out here in the fall, is to just find, music to play with groups of, less than 20 kids.
So if you were doing high school, let's back to your days in Mount Vernon and Robinson, would you be planning on marching in the fall?
No. and let's get this straight. I mean, I really value marching band,
right,
and what it can do, both musically, if done correctly, and socially for kids and for the community. So I am very pro marching band, but I just don't. How do you? And it's very physical activity. And so that does, when you're that physically active and you're using that kind of air and breathing and so on, you're going to have to be even farther apart than you are normally. So I just think that is going to create a real issue. And it looks to me like, at least in our immediate area, we're not even sure there'll be any contact sports at all in the fall. So, other than golf, and maybe cross country, and tennis. Those may be the only kind of sports we can offer in the fall. Yeah, and so that marching band would go right along with that. And since if there's not going to if you're not going to be allowed to travel because you can't get on a bus and be safe, it's going to be a real challenge to have any kind of competitive marching band.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice. I think you're right on the mark there. So let's go back. We've all got great stories from our early days of teaching. Some of them we want to share and some of them we don't, but we can look back and laugh on them today. But at that moment, I mean, they were incredible crises. Some of these young teachers probably in their first year of teaching, and they're going like, my God, the COVID virus hit, and I had to do virtual teaching at home, and my gosh. And hopefully 20 years from now, they can look back and laugh at this and go, can you believe we had to do that? So you got any stories from your early days of teaching you can share?
I have way too many that we have time for. So Bangor, Pennsylvania was a really interesting place. It was a combination of heritage of Welsh folks and Italian folks that were kind of put into the same community school. And I got hired by the superintendent. And when I went to the school to find my schedule, there was no band during the school day. Band was all after school. So it was like, come if you want to come, don't come if you don't want to come. And the school itself was 10 to 12, but my marching band used 8th and 9th graders and 10th through 12th graders. And the 8th and 9th graders used to get bussed up after school so they could come to marching band practice. Thank goodness I could work my way through. So that was my first year. My first chair trumpet was also my first chair horn. He did not read music. My drum major, who was a senior, did not play an instrument and did not read music. And I mean, it was one of those places where music was in the community, because I joined the Elks when I got to Bangor, Pennsylvania, because they did a variety show every year with about 50 male singers that was just incredible. So the town had that musical heritage, but the high school did not. So, fast forward 4 years later, when my career there was finished, we had band every day, and I was also the choir teacher, 3 times a week. I taught the jazz band. I taught music theory. I taught guitar, and I had rotating small group pull-out lessons every day, so that we kind of went from 0 to 100% in 4 years, and that was very gratifying. But it was scary, to start out that way, and it reminded me immediately of what Bob Zellner told us in college. He said, "Go out and get the worst job you can find." To take the worst job you can find and make all the mistakes you want, because nobody's going to know. He said, and that's how you learn and grow as a teacher. So I guess part of that, would be exactly what I would offer to a young teacher today. Don't run away from problems. Solve them, because it's going to help you become a better teacher.
So you look back at life, make a lot of decisions along the way. Any decisions you'd do over?
Well, certainly I tried to become a professional golfer. That had been. But so when I was a high school senior, I had a science teacher, and he offered both me and my best friend Bruce full scholarships to Rensselaer to major in science. And my best friend Bruce said, "Absolutely, I'll do that." And he was like, "Cool." And Stan, I said, "No, I'm going to be a high school band director." He just kind of looked at me like, "What?" I said, "That's what I want to do. It's what I've wanted to do since I was 8 years old." I mean, I knew early on that what I wanted to do with my life, and so I have no regrets about it. I mean, I've experienced so many great things through that whole process, and wouldn't trade it for the world.
You made a great decision back then, and you've influenced a lot of lives. And I happen to be one of them that you've influenced. You've been a great friend, a dear friend. I always enjoy time with you, Stan, and I can't wait to get on the golf course, but you're going to have to give me strokes. Okay, buddy?
Well, I might give myself a stroke, but that's
yeah. And the way I hit the ball, we will definitely practice social distancing without even trying. So there you go. Stan, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Charlie. I enjoyed it.
Stan Schoonover, he is a good one. He is one fine teacher and one fine human being. And I love the quote he shared from William D. Ravelli, that bands are still bands and great teaching is still great teaching. It's never been more true than it is today. And we need great teachers in our classrooms. We need teachers ready to meet the challenges that they're going to face this fall. We don't know what they're going to be, but we know they're going to be there. And I just hope that you're ready for it. We're going to be back with Bob Buckner right after this.
Today's podcast is made possible through the support of Hal Leonard, publisher of the Essential Elements Method for Band and the Essential Elements interactive website that is free for Essential Elements users. Essential Elements Interactive, or EEI, is a state-of-the-art, cloud-based support program that is constantly evolving to provide you and your students with more information and resources to help them learn and have fun while doing so. To learn more about EEI, visit EssentialElementsInteractive.com.
You know, one of the great things about having your own podcast is that you get to invite the people you really want and love. And man, I've been having so much fun with this, and today is no exception. Had a chance to meet this guy, I think 40 years ago or something like that, when we crossed paths at the Bands of America Summer Symposium in Whitewater, Wisconsin. And it was like an instant connection. And we both left, I think, at the end of the week with our ribs hurting from laughing so damn hard. But he has remained a dear friend, and I have so much respect for him as a person, as a musician, as a teacher. He's one of the real great people in our profession. I want to welcome my buddy Bob Buckner to the podcast. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Appreciate you going out on a limb to do this.
Yeah, well, you're a slam dunk. I'm not worried about that. You know, I was thinking back, as I just said, we passed our 40th anniversary of meeting each other. And I think it was, June of 1980. I was on the staff at Bands of America at Whitewater, and you were a Bands of America clinician that was working with a lab band. I mean, the whole marching thing was really in transition, and you were working with a lab band. It was an upstart band. I mean, they were just scuffling, and the director was a young guy who had a bright future, and everybody knew it. And they've turned into making quite a name for themselves. I mean, you helped Marion Catholic High School and their director, Greg Bim, that summer. And that's how we met. And I know you were a lot younger then. You remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. And when Tim Lotzenheiser came up with the idea to do a lab band, he suggested this Marion Catholic. Of course, I had no idea who that would be. I went up to Chicago to visit with them and was just blown away, first of all, with Greg. But then when the band got to Whitewater, they were so totally prepared. They knew all their music. They had everything memorized. The students were phenomenally well trained and behaved and focused. And geez, I thought every band was going to be like that. So they weren't, to say the least. But although we had some really good bands that came through that program, and for that time, I thought it was a really innovative program. And Greg Bim is still a dear friend. Matter of fact, we were doing some texting yesterday. So, yeah, great experience for me. Probably better for me and my staff. That's also the week I met L.J. Hancock. He actually worked on our staff that week as a volunteer. He was paying to go to camp and working with the band. So, yeah, pretty much fun.
Those were the days. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Greg Bim is one of the greats in our profession, and he's one of those guys that's been an incredible innovator, and he is always so eager to learn and is one of the most supportive people I've ever met. I've seen him work with younger directors and give advice and counsel, and Greg's great. I love him to death. So, Bob, you had a pretty meteoric rise to fame. You know, not many people knew who Bob Buckner was, and then in 1979, you brought this little band from Silva Webster High School in North Carolina to Whitewater and stole the show. In fact, I was talking with Tim Lotzenheiser about this yesterday, and he said, "Oh, I remember that." He said at the finals, and they were announcing the results. He said, your kids were going like, "I think they forgot about us. I think they forgot about us." And then all of a sudden, you're crowned the national champ. So we're going to get to that a little bit later about your time at Silva and going to Bands of America. But I want people to know a little bit more about Bob Buckner, the band director, and not Bob Buckner, the marching band director. So tell us your story about, you played tuba and what made you get in the band directing business.
Well, I guess I should start with learning to play tuba. I actually started band late. I was like a semester and a half late getting into band, but long story short, they needed a bass drummer for the Canton Labor Day Parade, and they recruited me to come in because they had two girls in the percussion section. Neither one of them wanted to play bass drum in the parade, so I was recruited. So I did that for about 6 months. A fellow named Charles Isley actually started me on percussion, and about before Christmas, maybe a little right after Christmas, the junior high band director came in and said, "Look, we don't have a tuba player." Well, before he finished, I had my hand up that I wanted to play something different. I just could see that I was going to be kind of confined in how much I was going to be able to do. So they had an all-state tuba player who was doing, at that time, you could do study halls, and he took me in the practice room, and for 2.5 weeks we worked on teaching me tuba. He taught me, first thing he did was teach me how to breathe, which when you think about that, that's probably the key to brass playing, period. Well, in 2 weeks, he said, you're ready to be in the band. So I come out and I'm like, really? He's like, "Oh yeah, you can play with those guys." So we sit down, and I'll never forget, we were playing this little arrangement of Great Gate of Kiev. And when the band started, I started playing, and we finished about, 2 or 3 phrases. And when we stopped, the entire band turned around and looked at me. And it was like a moment I'll never forget. I get cold chills thinking about it. I realized I had found a place. I'd found something that really meant something to me, and I was so consumed with all that sound around me. So it was really a fun thing to have happen. I had a great high school band director, actually 2 that followed, Aaron Hyatt, who I ended up following to Western Carolina years later, and then Jim Crocker, and both were terrific mentors to me. Both are deceased now. But I told Jim after my freshman year in high school, I said, I think I want to be a band director. And he said, "Well, Bobby, I've got 3 years to talk you out of that." And he said, "If you still want to do it," he said, "I'll support you." So I did all the things. He drove me to camps. We would drive to East Carolina University, which was at that time was about a 7.5, 8-hour drive. So I could go to camps in the summer. I went to several band camps, and I just came back from each one just more and more enthused and more excited about it. So then I decided that I would go to Western Carolina because Aaron Hyde offered me a $50 a quarter scholarship. And my sister and I were the first 2 in our family to go on to higher education. And my dad always told me, he said, "You do whatever you want to," but he said, "Do something that's going to give you a career and not a job." And he explained the difference. He said, "That'll give you the opportunity to make some of your own decisions about what you want to do." Gosh, what good advice that was. So I followed Aaron to Western Carolina for my $50 quarter, and we were on 3-quarter system. But for that, I was able to be the uniform manager, the equipment manager, and the librarian. And little did I know that was the foundation of my band directing career, because I learned how to handle the logistics of the band. And it was a tremendous opportunity for me, and one that I've sort of filed away never thinking I would be a college band director, but I filed away the leadership aspect of that. Plus, the important thing was, if, as you know, if you're, you have keys. And so I was able to access the building. I could get in after hours to practice, and I could actually, I think the statute of limitations is up on all that now, but I spent a lot of time in the building, able to, to sort of stretch my days out. So that's kind of how I got into it.
And was Silva your first job?
Yes. In the summers, I was working at a place called Daco Corporation in Hazelwood, North Carolina, and they were actually where I live now. I live about a mile from there. And what I was doing was really hard work. They made radiator hose, they made mattresses, a lot of foam rubber products, V-belts for automobiles, things like that. It was really hard work. And I got a call in August of that year, and it was from my dad. Came over from the maintenance shop where he was in charge of maintenance, and said, you've got a phone call you need to return. So when I called, it was Aaron Hyatt, and he said, I've got a job I want you to take. And I'm like, well, I've got to finish school. And he said, no, you need to take this job and we'll work out the school. So long story short, I go to meet with the principal, a man named Carl Hooper, to whom I will forever be indebted. Interesting guy, spent the Second World War in a Japanese prison camp. So discipline was not an issue at our school. But he interviewed me, and that was in the time when this was a small rural community, and you could not find enough band directors to do the work. And he hired me. So I went to school full time and taught in 7 schools at the same time, and made the dean's list, which was probably the second time I made the dean's list after I got there, because I was just so focused. And I at that point, it all became really real to me that all this stuff I was learning in class, I was really going to need. So I do remember that my salary the first year, because I was part-time, was $250 a month. And they gave me $50 for gas, and I gave that to my dad because I was driving his car. I didn't even own a car at the time. So it was, it was quite a start, but absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. If I was teaching a class, and I taught, as I said, I taught 7 schools. 6 of them were grades 1 through 8. I never had a band room in any of those schools until a bit later. But what I would do is I would go in, and I carry all my supplies in my car. Before you would text and drive, you would write notes and drive. At least that's what I did. So I was constantly trying to keep myself organized and keep stuff going the way it was supposed to go. And if I didn't know how to do something, if I had a question about clarinet embouchure, I just go back to school, and I go find the clarinet teacher, said, look, you got to teach me this. You got to show me how to do this. You got to explain this. So all the pedagogy really kind of came to life for me. And I think that was the place where that started to make sense to me. Is like, you got to get kids to understand how to make a good sound, how to learn the different skills they need, the articulations, how to play the instrument. And so it was a terrific opportunity. Plus, I had the opportunity to meet teachers in the school. Being in schools like that, basically there might be 1 6th grade class. So I made sure I knew all the 5th and 6th grade teachers, and I would take them coffee and say, look, tell me who your sharp kids are. And they would help recruit for me, because after I was there for a while, they realized that, number one, I was going to show up every day. And number 2, the kids were going to be challenged, and most of them became pretty successful. I mean, even in that program, and this was a county of 20,000 people, and so you can imagine how small the school system was. We were still recruiting 110 to 120 beginners every year, because kids, they basically want something good. They want to be a part of something good, and so that was a great opportunity for me.
So I understand that in your early days, you even taught school in a school bus?
Well, somewhere along the way, maybe 72, 73, somewhere in there, we got the idea. We just had we had no opportunity to have our own band room. So in North Carolina, they would retire the school buses after every so many years. They'd just take them out of service. And I had a great superintendent, and I convinced him that maybe it was a good thing for us to take one of those and remodel it. So my assistant director at the time, a guy named Mike Trull, who was a very innovative, hardworking guy, and so we decided that we took all the seats out, we carpeted the floor, we installed 220 heat, and he painted the inside. He spray painted it. I'm sure OSHA would not appreciate the way he went about it, but we had this great little room, and we would carry maybe a dozen folding chairs. We had to tie everything down. We had a little repair station. We would carry a tuba. We would carry French horn, the euphonium, so that the kids didn't have to carry those to school. So, and we taught him that until I think he finally blew the engine in it, and we just didn't have the funds to replace it. But
so you were driving the school bus from school to school?
Yeah. So if you want to teach band, you have to do what you have to do. So that was what we had to do.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, I mentioned earlier, you won the Bands of America Summer Nationals in Whitewater in 1979. So talk about that experience, getting the kids prepared, going to Whitewater. What are you expected? The results. Give us a trip down memory lane on that one.
Oh, every time I start thinking about that, I sort of have a different train of thought. But sort of where I am is it's probably one of the most remarkable experiences ever. By that time, by the mid to late 70s, actually early 70s, we had a good band program. I always thought if you stayed in one place at least 6 years, so you got your kids, your beginners and all those people in the program, you started to realize if you were a good teacher and where your weak areas were. And there were two of us, fortunately, and we were able to discuss that and build a curriculum. Steve Trull, who's now with the Mullen Uniform, Steve was my assistant for a year, and he helped me develop a really nice curriculum so the kids could play. I appreciate the fact in the intro that you talked about me as a band director, not just a marching band director, because particularly during that time, you were labeled one or the other. Well, if it's a good marching band, they certainly can't play, and vice versa. And of course, now all that's changed. If you want to win a marching band contest, you better be able to play to even have a chance to start with. And in reality, I felt like we were like that all along. We never had the depth of talent that you would see in some of these great bands today because we had 800 students. The band we took to Whitewater had 30 kids who were 7th and 8th graders. So now that would include some guard people and percussionists. But I mean, that was what was remarkable about it. We had, I think we did the whole trip for about $12,000. We had a parent who loaned us he drove a tractor trailer. We hung our signs on it, so everybody thought we owned our own tractor trailer, and he never told anybody any different. And so it was kind of fun that we looked like we were this really big deal, but we weren't. We spent the night in Ben Davis High School in Indianapolis on the way up and rehearsed there. Ray Cox was the band director at that point. We went on up to Hayworth, and we're entered in a contest, sort of to get our feet wet, because we had prepared the band and had really refined our show that spring. I had a lot of really great input from the people who had judged our show that spring. Bruce Burritt was down, Freddie Martin was in. I had Michael Coomer was working with our percussion at that point. So we got together with our staff and really sort of refined the show and got it to where we wanted it to be. But nobody had really seen it but us. We thought it was pretty good, but we didn't really know. And I was so shocked that we won the Hayworth show. And that, by the way, was the second time I'd ever met Ken Snook. And he was standing behind me at the steps of the press box and made the comment to me, he said, "You're going to win this show." And I was like, really? He's like, oh, yeah, really. So, and I learned that Ken always deals in the truth. So he was absolutely correct. So my thought going into this was that we could be competitive in the lower class, Class A. I had seen the Hanover band from Pennsylvania. They were wonderful. I thought they were going to be the big competition in that class, although Monticello was in that. Illinois is a really, really fine band. And actually, that whole show, that was a wonderful show. Tate was in that. Not Live Oak, but Independence High School from California, Falls Church, Virginia. I mean, you go on that list. For years and years, that was one of the best band shows I'd ever seen. So at any rate, we get to Whitewater. We're staying in the dorms, which was wonderful for the bands because that's why we could do this so inexpensively. Because we did everything to cut corners. Our first meal when we traveled was always a picnic. We'd just tell the kids, bring a picnic and we'll find a rest area, and we'd stop and spread out at the picnic tables. And that's where we would eat our first meal just to save money. So when we got to Chicago on the way up, stopped and did hit this, all the scenic things, took the kids to the Sears Tower, a couple of museums, but I'll never forget in the Sears Tower, some of the kids called the local radio station, and of course the announcer was a friend, and everybody in town knew we were going on the trip, and they were like, if you'll step outside and wave, we think we can see you from here. I mean, this is the most naive group of kids you can ever imagine, but they were hard workers and they were hardcore, and they had prepared themselves. So we get into Whitewater. I loved that atmosphere. Bands were everywhere. They were practicing all over the grounds. You had people walking around just watching bands rehearse. You had this excitement of this wonderful camp that Larry McCormick had been, he had visualized and put together. It was just such a magic place. And then we go into prelims, and I think there were probably maybe 35 to 40 bands. There was a good band show, and that was only about the fourth year, maybe. So we go into prelims, and I'm thinking, boy, if we can just make finals. And I don't know if you remember, but at that time they had a sign, and it was a leaderboard, and they would put it down at the right of the press box, and it showed who the top 12 were, not in any particular order and not with scores, but you kind of knew where you stood. So I noticed as the day went on, we watched the prelims, that our band just kept getting closer and closer, because our goal was really, let's just make finals. And as it turned out, we made finals. We go into the band directors meeting, and they have us draw for position. And so I drew number one. We're going on first. So, and my thought was, well, I have ruined this for this band. And I remember telling my drum major, and she said, oh, it doesn't matter when we go on. She said, we're gonna do great. And she said, that's what you've always told us is, just do your best and don't worry about the rest of it. Have fun in the program. So I sort of relaxed, and the next day we went on one. I remember it was daylight, when we went on. I think maybe they had turned the lights on. We gave a terrific show, not a perfect show. I actually thought our prelim show was a little bit better. But as the night went on, I honestly didn't think I saw anybody that had a better package. I thought there were a couple of bands that maybe played a little bit better than we did, although we ended up being, very competitive in every caption. I think we won two captions. So it was, and then they announced the awards. And as you said, the band thought that they had been forgotten. We end up, what I remember is that someone had a tape recorder in the dorm, and a parent had recorded the announcement, and it said, and now the 1979 Grand National Champion, Sylva Webster High School. Well, in the dorm that night, somebody kept playing that over and over. And every time they would make that announcement, that every kid in the band would start cheering. uh, so it was really some magical kind of fun things. The Hanover band actually stayed in the dorm with us, and Charlie Brody and Colleen, they have been dear friends ever since. I ended up writing for Charlie a little bit later, but so it just this whole circle of friends that we got to meet during that time was so magical. We got back to Silva. We got lost on the way back, and we always teased our guys because it was the Cherokee Boys Club and run by the Cherokee tribe. A wonderful organization, great transportation company, but they got lost going out of Chicago, so we drove about an hour and a half out of our way. We didn't let them forget that. We were like, you guys are Indians. You're not supposed to get lost. You're supposed to know where you are all the time. So we get to the county line, and everybody in the county, it seemed like, was sitting at the county line. It was like midnight or 1 a.m. It was really late. And they even brought the fire truck at that time. So
the fire truck.
Yeah, they brought the only one. So it was, we sort of paraded through downtown, and that was my last day. That was the last day on the job, because I started my business and started the very next day with a camp, actually fairly close by. But that's kind of my memory of it. What happened from it was extraordinary. And a lot of that's due to at that time, MBA, or Marching Bands of America. But Larry McCormick was a real visionary about trying to put things together and put information out there. He was a businessman who was really kind of a drum corps band guy. And so he got this idea of doing this thing called Weekend with the Experts. So he put top designers, top color guard people, top percussionists together. And we go around the country and do these clinics, and it, quite honestly, paid really, really well. I remember that I worked on putting the clinic together probably for 6 months. I wrote, I researched, it was coordinated. So if you talked about something, there would be a slide, there would be a videotape. And I got Freddie Martin he was my, get this, Freddie was my assistant. And basically, between the two of us, as slow as we talked, we could fill the time up with as much as we knew. So it was just a lot of fun to do that. I also got all kinds of opportunities to go teach. I have to tell one quick story if we have time. I was invited. I was home on a Sunday afternoon in, I guess it was 79, July 4th. And I was going to have 2 or 3 days. And I didn't even have a home. I had just moved everything out, and I was storing my stuff. And but my parents had me over for dinner. My mom had fixed my favorite dinner. And the phone rings. And my dad answered it. And he said, "Oh, I think you want the other Mr. Buckner." Well, on the other end of the phone was Jim King. Well, Jim King at that time was the director of bands at East Texas State University, which is now Texas A&M Commerce. And he said, "George Zingali's canceled on the clinic, and I would like for you to fill that spot." And I said, "Well, let me check my calendar." I said, "When is it?" He said, "You start tomorrow morning at 8. And of course, I'm in North Carolina. He said, "I've already checked the flights." He said, "You can be there." And he said, "I'll pick you up at the airport." Somehow he talked me into doing this. So I went to Texas, and of course Jim picks me up. The other part of the story is that I said, "How long does it take us to get from Dallas to Commerce?" And he reached down the floor, and there was a 6-pack of beer. And he said, "When this is gone, we'll be there." And seriously, when we were finishing it, we could see the big old Whitley Hall, which I know you remember, the biggest building in East Texas at that time, I guess.
That and the water tower.
So my real claim to fame was there were like 80 band directors, 80 to 100 band directors in this clinic. And I mean, these were the big time guys, because they had really built this camp into something special. A guy named Ed Jones was running the camp. But my claim to fame is I taught the Texas bands how to stand in a curved line. They had no idea how to chart curvilinear, how to use the drafting tools, all that kind of stuff. So I made so many friends down there. I wrote a lot in Texas over the years. I finally had to stop writing for bands in Texas because of the state championships, and I was doing I was actually judging, and I didn't want to get in a situation where I was trying to judge and write and that kind of stuff. It's not very ethical. But so at any rate, that was one of the crazy things that came of that.
Well, yeah, you just kind of had this meteoric rise. I mean, you just zoom right to the top. If somebody wanted to get a drill written for their marching band, I mean, who do you call? You call Bob Buckner. Who do you call Ghostbusters, right? No, you call Bob Buckner. And and I mean, you had it. Your drills worked. I mean, you made sure the horns were in the right places, and you've written for so many, and you're still writing. You got any idea how many shows you've written since that time back in 1979, 1980?
Well, actually, I started before that. I started in 1973. My first customer was a man named, who's a very dear friend, and he died about 2 weeks ago, Ed Taylor. Ed Taylor was in Clinton, North Carolina, and he was the first person I wrote for other than my own band. And he had seen my band at contest, and he wanted to do that. He said, I have no idea how to do it, but I want you to teach me. So for years, we went to Clinton, North Carolina and wrote shows, and his band was wonderful. He taught 36 years in the same school. He was the only guy. He taught everybody. He taught the beginners. He taught, so I could relate to that. So if I start there, and word goes, everything's word of mouth, and of course the Bands of America thing is really when the word of mouth really hit. And I know it's probably 1,000 to 1,500 shows.
Wow.
I've never tried to keep up with it. I think the most I ever did in one summer was like 72 or something like that.
Oh my God.
So I know I didn't sleep much.
So how's that changed over the years? How's drill writing changed from 1979 to 2020?
Well, it used to be in 1979, you dealt with the band director, and usually that worked out pretty well because they could kind of give you basic instructions and how the band marched, how they played, what have you. Now you deal with the team, and in most ways that is far better. But in terms of structuring the program, it's a lot more difficult because you're trying to make more people happy. And when you're writing a show, a current show, everything is always a compromise. I'm sure they would tell you the same thing on a Broadway musical. You can't do everything for everybody. A lot of people that get involved in the activity don't understand the logistics of it. They think that the color guard can be airlifted 84 steps and 8 counts. So, you have to deal with that. And you try to be patient because these are such creative people and a lot of young people who are really excited about it, and they're going to be the people there with the product every day. So I think that's the big thing that's changed. I think the other thing is that I'm much slower now. I used to write by hand. I wrote by hand up until probably 93, 94. I would still write. I was writing on Poware, which I started using about 1982. But a lot of the shows I could still write by hand, and I could write more quickly because I always could sort of see things. I saw it in a musical sense. It was almost like visualizing a score to me. And I always thought it would be so wonderful to have a concert where you could, when the euphoniums have a melody, they're on the front of the stage, and then suddenly they're back and the clarinets have the melody. So that's kind of the way I've always approached it. I don't know, but what happens now is because Poware is so much like a video game that it gives you the opportunity to try every possible thing in every possible phrase. And one of the things I learned years ago about drill writing is it's not every phrase needs to be perfect. It needs to be efficient. It needs to work. And I think that's what happens. I think it just slows the process down for me because I start writing and I start playing. I start enjoying that process to the point. Now, I don't enjoy sitting in a chair 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day, but I do enjoy the creative process because you're constantly, now I can play the music constantly. before I wore out a lot of cassette players, and now you just, you download it on the screen. So I think that's the big thing that's changed. I think it's more complex musically, sometimes to the detriment of entertainment and accessibility. But that's the way it is. And if you're going to choose to write competitive shows, number one, you have to have the chops. You have to know, have to know how to write things that people can clean given the amount of time they have. And I think that's the biggest thing I see that's a problem. A lot of people write shows that there's no way that they're ever going to have even a relative amount of success with getting it precise and clean, things like that.
So somewhere along the way, then you're writing full time, and then all of a sudden the opportunity comes for you to become the marching band director at Western Carolina University. So tell us about that transition in your life and how that came about.
Well, slightly. There are two parts of that story. Number one was that I was at East Tennessee State for 4 years. And the reason being that I had a friend, Richard Compton, who was the chairman of the music department, and they lost their band director in August. So I'm at home immersed in drill, trying to get all this stuff done. And he calls and said, I need you to help me find a band director. Well, you couldn't find anybody. You could find some people that wanted to do it, but they couldn't do it in 10 days. So he finally calls me back later that day and he said, would you come look at it? I'm like, there's no way I could do that. And when I talked with Donna about it, she reminded me that we did have a son starting college that fall, and it would be helpful if we could figure out a way to make it work. But so I drove over, looked at it, and decided to do it. So I stayed there for 4 years, and I was director of band. So I had a really full plate. I was doing everything: jazz band, concert bands. I was teaching tuba lessons. I was teaching techniques courses, which I loved doing. And actually, that was sort of the impetus for the rest of my career. I realized how much I'd missed teaching, because you can write all the shows you want to, but at the end of the season, I was always depressed. But when I had kids around, when I had students around, it was always a good feeling, because they always wanted to know, they're looking forward. What's next? Where do we go from here? So 1991, July 4th, that son who started college when I went to East Tennessee died suddenly. Had a blood clot enter his heart. So it, of course, rocked our family to our core. And about 2 weeks later, John West, who was the director of bands at Western Carolina, called me and said, would you be interested in doing the athletic band at Western? So Don and I talked about it, and I was like, well, I've already signed a contract with East Tennessee, and I said, I can't just leave these people. And she said, well, why don't you figure out the schedule? So it worked out that Western rehearsed, East Tennessee rehearsed every day, but 2 days a week in the morning and 3 days a week in the afternoon. Or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember. But at any rate, she figured out that I could do both bands. So for a semester, I was a band director at 2 different universities in 2 different states with marching band. So I did that for from August through January. I left over there. Now you have to understand that I had gone to Western Carolina, and one of the things that I always thought about was what the potential was to do a marching band there. Either people, a lot of people had varying degrees of interest in it, and sometimes they had some really good bands. At times they were, there was not a lot of enthusiasm toward it. But I started thinking about some of those great bands that I'd seen, the Troy State Band, the Jacksonville State Band, the James Madison University, Westchester, of that size. They were FCS schools, or the not Division I, but the championship series. But a lot of those bands had taken the idea that they would make this a music education laboratory, and so that's what I tried to develop. I tried to develop what I would do when I started recruiting for Western was I would call band directors that I knew in the state, and I called in maybe every chip I had, and I said, I want to know who your best kids are, and I want to talk to them, and I want you to talk to them, because if they want to be a band director, I can teach them to be a band director. And that's how it started. So then we started to develop the leadership program. And for me, what leadership does is that allows you to expand your personal time. So if you have things that students they can handle those responsibilities, then you can do the things that maybe they are not prepared to do or shouldn't be doing. They shouldn't be handling your budget. They shouldn't be doing things like that. But in this case, it just worked out so perfectly that you have all these bright, talented students who really want to do this. I don't know how many they have in the leadership team now. When I left Western, we usually ran from 90 to 100. And you've actually seen the benefits of that. You've seen that Tournament of Champions marching band contest is totally run by students. We don't have parents. So everything is done basically by students who take such pride in trying to do this thing really well. Well, if you have been a staff coordinator for that band and, taking a 500-piece band to the Rose Bowl parade, taking your 45-piece band to their first football game is not going to be quite the challenge that it might be for me when I did it in 1966. So that's sort of where that comes from.
Yeah, that band was amazing. I mean, I remember seeing and hearing the band at the Tournament of Champions and that contest that you held, and you mentioned at Western. And I remember seeing the very first time I was there, this massive humanity coming on the field, and they just kept coming and they kept coming and coming, and they covered the field, and then they hit their first note, and my face felt like I was in a car riding at Mach speed. I mean, man, my just pushed me right back, and then the show started. I mean, it was simply, fantastic. So, yeah, Bob, you've been around the world. You've been working with bands, serving a clinician, adjudicator, guest conductor. You've been a public school teacher, university director. What's been your favorite part about being a band director all these years?
It's actually pretty simple. It's the students and the colleagues that I've had, the teachers I've worked with, the people I've gotten to meet. I've met everybody in our activity, through the things with the Bands of America National Honors Band in the Rose Parade and the All-American bands that Earl Hurry put together. I've had the opportunity to work with the absolute finest, and these people come to you ready to work as a team. The students that people send now to these all-star units are just such terrific people. For people who are worried about our future, they need to realize that these students will take care of us. They understand how to make a plan. They understand real leadership. They understand how to work together. And they understand that togetherness is what brings us success. And so for me, to have had those students, I know with the Army All-American Band, rarely after about 2 or 3 years, once we really got it rolling and accepted, every kid was an all-state player in their state. Well, not only were they great players, but their band directors had recommended them. They had to do a video interview, that kind of stuff. So you see what kind of students you're getting. But when I look back on all the teaching I've done, some of my best friends are people that I've taught. They're either as band directors or as just people in the community. My dentist was in my high school band. Actually, 2 of the vice chancellors at Western Carolina University were in the Silva Webster band. So to me, you look at people like that and you realize there are people in those positions who can be counted on. They're terrific people, but they also have the kind of integrity and leadership ability to know if they have a weakness somewhere in their program, they know how to find someone who can help them fix that weakness. And I just think that that's been the most remarkable thing for me is I just feel so privileged to have had, the students and the colleagues that I've had over the years.
Well, I don't know if you're anything like me, but I still think I'm 18 years old, and when I try to move my body, kind of tells me otherwise. And when I look in the mirror, it really tells me otherwise. But if you could go back and look at that kid that played bass drum and then converted to tuba and then was in high school, and your director said, "Hey, I'm going to give you 3 years to try to change your mind." What advice would you give that young Bob Buckner?
I think the one thing would be strive for balance. Um, Donna and I've been married 39 years, and this has been that has been the thing that she's brought to my life. I mean, so many wonderful opportunities that we've had together, but just understanding that the importance of the whole, not just the importance of your profession or the importance of even your family. Some people get so caught up in family that they sort of hide all their talents. So I think you have to learn to balance both. You have to learn where the limits are for both. And sometimes one has to give so that the other can succeed and vice versa. And I think if I were doing it again, early in your career, balance is really probably not that important if you're, if you're not married, if you don't have a family, but you learn it quickly when you start to work with band parents, because the areas that were weakest for me were band literature, because there really wasn't any in 1966. If you had a really good band, you played transcriptions, or you didn't. That was it. But the pedagogy was always a challenge, but also the parents. And so one of the things you have to learn in terms of balancing your program is that your parents need to be led. They need to have the leadership light on for them. They really are not your enemies. And a lot of times young band directors go out and they dread the parent meeting. Well, just prepare for them and say, "Hey, we're here to boost this. This is what we need. Here, what are your suggestions?" Just involve them just like you do anybody else. Because if a parent takes the time to come to a meeting, they care about their child. So, try to take advantage of that. And I think that would be the one word I would say to every young teacher is find a way to balance things. Don't just get yourself so that you're one dimensional.
Yeah, ever since I met you, I think, Bob, you're one of those passionate band directors I've ever met. But your family has always been, paramount in your life. I mean, you always talk so much about your family, and you spend a lot of time with them. And so I think that's just a remarkable thing. And I think you've practiced that pretty darn well throughout your life. And I know that every time I have the opportunity to be with you, it makes my life a little bit richer. I have a lot of fun, and we laugh a lot. And hopefully we're going to get through this coronavirus, and we're going to meet somewhere and maybe bring our golf clubs and play a round of golf. How about that?
Absolutely. I cannot wait. Matter of fact, as soon as I finish today, I'm going to the golf course.
Well, I am jealous. Bob Buckner, thanks so much for being on the podcast, man. I love you, brother.
Love you, Charlie. Thank you so much.
I don't believe I've ever met a more down-to-earth person than Bob Buckner. Bob is one of those guys who loves band, and he loves teaching, and he loves kids. And he's the poster child for working hard leads to good things. Working hard can lead to great things. And Bob has accomplished a lot of great things in life. Yet he still remains so humble. He's such a wonderful guy. Anybody that's ever had the chance to work with him has come away richer. I can tell you that. Well, that's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Next week, we're going to sit down and have a nice long conversation with Paul Lavender, international composer and arranger, and Vice President of Instrumental Publications for Hal Leonard. That's Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. If you would like to send a question to Charlie or have a comment, please send an email to bandtalkcharlie@gmail.com. We hope you will let your colleagues, students, and friends know about Band Talk with Charlie Mangini and friends. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.